What if the most powerful man in a nation was not asked to change a law, not asked to launch a reform, not asked to defeat an enemy, but was asked to make one silent gesture? The future of a country did not begin with a speech. It began with a pause. He did not stand behind a podium. There were no cameras, no applause, no carefully prepared words. Only a man sitting alone with the weight of an entire nation pressing on his chest. He was not tired in the way sleep can fix. He was tired in the way only responsibility can create. Every day, people expected answers, certainty, strength, direction. Every decision carried faces he would never meet, families he would never know, consequences that would not belong to him alone. He carried the future of millions into rooms where no one could agree, where every option created another wound, where every solution left someone behind. His country had walked through fear, through division, through grief, through silence. Places where laughter once lived had learned the sound of waiting, and still, they looked to him. Because leaders are allowed to be symbols, but they are human long before they become one. There comes a moment in leadership when reason itself grows quiet, when strategy stops bringing clarity, when calculations no longer feel enough, when every answer sounds like another risk. That moment did not come to him in strength. It came in weakness. After long nights without rest, after meetings that ended without resolution, after prayers that felt like words falling into dust, his body finally gave in, and his mind slipped into that narrow space between waking and sleep, the place where defenses drop, where pride loses its armor, and where truth is no longer filtered by control. And it was there, in that fragile space between exhaustion and silence, that he encountered Jesus. There was no thunder, no spectacle, no voice shaking the room, no fire in the sky, no accusation, no fear. His presence arrived without force, yet everything inside the man became still at once. Not the heavy silence of pressure, the deep silence of safety. Every anxious thought stopped competing. Every inner argument fell quiet. Every calculation simply stepped aside. He understood something without being told. There is an authority higher than any office, higher than any uniform, higher than any flag, higher than any command. Not an authority that conquers, an authority that simply is. He did not appear as a king on a throne. He did not appear as a warrior wrapped in fire. There was no crown, no weapon, no banner. Only a quiet light. A light that did not blind the eyes, yet made everything else feel dim by comparison. The light did not come from a direction. It simply existed. The first thing he noticed was the complete absence of fear. In leadership, fear is constant. Fear of failure, fear of betrayal, fear of choosing wrong at the wrong moment. But in that presence, fear had nowhere to stand. It dissolved without resistance, like mist under the morning sun. He did not feel judged. He did not feel inspected. He felt known. And there is a difference. To be judged is to be measured against rules. To be known is to be seen completely, without the need to defend yourself. In that knowing, he understood something that surprised him. His title meant nothing there. His rank meant nothing there. His power meant nothing there. And strangely, that realization did not diminish him. It relieved him. He did not kneel because he was told to. He lowered himself because it felt natural, like gravity reclaiming its role. Pride did not need to be stripped away. It simply lost relevance. He realized something both unsettling and freeing. Political power is loud. Moral authority is quiet. Political power demands attention. Moral authority does not. It simply exists, and everything else adjusts around it. For a long moment, no words were spoken, yet communication was already happening, not through sentences, but through understanding, placed directly into the heart. He knew that this presence carried authority greater than any constitution, greater than any command structure, greater than any national interest. Not authority enforced by force, authority rooted in truth. And in that stillness, one message became clear without urgency. Chaos is never the final word. History is not as uncontrolled as men believe. Only after the silence had fully settled, he finally spoke. And what he asked was not heavy. It was not dramatic. It was not revolutionary. It was almost disarmingly small. He did not ask him to change the Constitution. He did not ask him to declare a new religion. He did not ask him to punish enemies or reward allies. He did not offer a strategy. He offered a gesture. So before every meeting that would shape the life of the nation, before every decision that could alter the future of millions, he was asked to begin by making the sign of the cross. For a brief moment, surprise crossed his mind. In a world burning with complexity, in a world fractured by violence, poverty, manipulation, and power struggles, how could something so small possibly matter? He had expected something larger, something harder, something that would shake institutions. Instead, he was given a movement that takes only seconds, and yet, in that presence he understood. This was not about religion alone. It was about humility. It was about memory. It was about placing the human ego back into its proper size. Because leadership is not ownership. Leadership is stewardship. The sign of the cross was not presented as a performance. It was not a tool to divide believers from non-believers. It was presented as an act of remembrance. A pause, placed at the very beginning of power. A reminder before words turn into positions, before opinions harden into camps, before egos take control of the room. To make that sign is to admit limitation. It says, without speaking, that human intelligence is not absolute. That authority does not originate from a chair, a title, or a uniform. That no leader, no matter how capable, ever sees the full picture alone. The gesture places every decision beneath something higher than strategy. In leadership, especially in crisis, the temptation is always the same: to believe that speed is more important than correctness, that winning is more important than truth, and that authority means exemption from accountability. The sign of the cross interrupts that illusion. It slows the room by only a few seconds. But in leadership, seconds matter. Those seconds create space. Space for conscience to speak. Space for arrogance to soften. Space for responsibility to re-enter the conversation. He was shown something even deeper. The gesture was not meant to place others under judgment. It was meant to place himself there first, before judging anyone else, before signing anything, before speaking for anyone. He would stand under a higher moral reference. Power, when left unexamined, becomes dangerous. Power, when submitted to something greater than itself, becomes service. That was the request. Nothing more. Nothing less. And then he was left with a choice. When he returned fully to himself, when the quiet light had withdrawn and his body rested once again in the ordinary world, the request did not echo like a command. It lingered like a question. What happens when a leader chooses humility before control? He did not announce anything. He did not prepare a speech. He did not explain his experience to his cabinet. He did not ask permission. He simply began. At the first meeting that followed, before documents were opened, before voices rose, before positions were taken, he made the sign of the cross. Quietly, calmly, without drama. He did not look around the room. He did not wait for anyone to follow. He did not invite attention. He placed the gesture where power usually begins. And something shifted. Not in the room at first, inside him. Leadership trains the mind to stay tense, always alert, always defending a position, always prepared to dominate the space. That single gesture dismantled that posture within him, not by weakening his resolve, but by reorienting it. He entered the meeting not as a man who needed to win, but as a man who needed to serve. And the difference was not philosophical. It was practical. The first change was humility, not the kind that performs weakness, the kind that recognizes dependence. He spoke less in the opening moments. He listened longer. He noticed emotional currents in the room that he would normally override in the name of efficiency. The second change was focus. Ambition scatters the mind. Fear accelerates it. That small pause slowed his inner rhythm. Decisions stopped feeling like reactions. They began to feel like responses. The third change was moral clarity. Every decision can be measured many ways: political cost, economic impact, public reaction, strategic advantage. But one question is often avoided. Is this right? The gesture did not answer that question for him. It forced him to ask it. And when a leader asks that question honestly, power begins to change direction. It becomes harder to justify cruelty as necessity, harder to excuse corruption as pragmatism, harder to sacrifice the invisible for the visible. He realized something unexpected. Authority does not weaken when it bows. It sharpens. He did not become less decisive. He became more precise. He did not lose control of the room. He gained control of himself. This was not magic. It was alignment. And alignment changes everything. But life did not suddenly become easier. There were no headlines, no dramatic turning point, no overnight peace. People still arrived at work with their habits, their fears, their ambitions. Conflicts did not disappear. Problems did not solve themselves. But something began to repeat, and repetition is where truth becomes visible. Meetings that started with that quiet pause began to unfold differently, not perfectly, differently. The tone softened before it sharpened. Voices still disagreed, but they no longer rushed to dominate. People listened long enough to actually hear each other. Interruptions became fewer. Silences became meaningful instead of uncomfortable. Decisions, once made, carried more weight. Not because they were enforced with fear, but because they were understood. People left the room knowing what had been decided, and more importantly, why. And something unexpected followed. Execution improved. In leadership, failure rarely comes from a lack of decisions. It comes from decisions that exist only on paper. Plans that collapse the moment resistance appears. agreements that are applauded in the room and quietly ignored afterward. That pattern began to weaken. When a meeting started with an acknowledgement of moral accountability, words gained gravity. Commitments felt less flexible. Excuses felt thinner. He noticed something else. Egos retreated. Not because anyone was embarrassed, not because authority became softer, but because the atmosphere stopped rewarding performance. The room no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a place of responsibility. No one announced this change. Well, no one analyzed it. It simply became visible through behavior. Success did not come from supernatural intervention. It came from collective alignment. When people remember that they are accountable to something beyond immediate advantage, cooperation increases. Trust stabilizes. Execution follows. This is how real change happens. Quietly, incrementally, without spectacle. Nothing about their circumstances became easier. But their ability to face those circumstances improved, and that made all the difference. As the pattern repeated, he began to understand something quietly unsettling. This experience was never meant for him alone. It carried a lesson written in a language deeper than politics. Nations do not collapse because they lack power. They collapse when power loses its moral anchor. But history does not suffer from a shortage of strong leaders. It suffers from a shortage of grounded ones. Men and women who can command armies, control budgets, move markets, and influence millions, yet forget to ask themselves what they are serving. The gesture did not create morality. It revealed it. It forced a question every leader eventually tries to avoid. Who stands above me? When that question disappears, leadership becomes dangerous. Not immediately, not loudly, but slowly. Decisions become easier to justify. Harm becomes easier to explain away. People become statistics. Consequences become abstractions. A leader who never bows will eventually demand that everyone else does. Strength without humility does not protect a nation. It exhausts it. He learned something the world rarely teaches, that a strong leader is not the one who is always right. A strong leader is the one who remains accountable even when no one has the power to challenge him, especially then. Accountability to law matters. Accountability to institutions matters. But accountability to conscience is irreplaceable. Laws can be rewritten. Institutions can be captured. Conscience, when truly awake, cannot be bought. The world trains leaders to project certainty at all costs. Never hesitate. Never admit doubt. Never slow down. But honest uncertainty is often the beginning of wisdom. That small gesture reminded him that leadership does not stand above people. It stands between two obligations. One upward, toward truth. One outward, toward people. When that balance disappears, power tilts. And when power tilts too far, it eventually falls. What this lesson was never meant to belong to one religion. It was never meant to divide. It belongs to anyone who understands one simple reality. Authority without restraint becomes destruction. Every person who holds influence over a company, over a community, over a family, or even over a single decision that affects another life, faces the same question. Before you decide for others, what do you bow to? He began to see the gesture itself in a different way. Not as a religious symbol alone, but as an orientation. Two simple lines, one vertical, one horizontal. The vertical line points upward. It represents responsibility beyond the visible world, responsibility before truth, before conscience, before God, or whatever name a person gives to ultimate moral reality. Thus, it reminds a leader that every decision echoes further than the next headline, further than the next election, further than personal legacy. The horizontal line stretches outward. It represents responsibility toward people, toward families, toward workers, toward soldiers, toward children who will never know the meeting rooms where their future is decided, toward lives that carry the consequences long after signatures fade. A leader stands at the intersection of those two lines. That is where power becomes service. When leadership looks only upward, it becomes detached. When it looks only outward, it becomes reckless or populist. When it looks at neither, it becomes dangerous. The cross marks the place where both must meet. Not domination, not control, but responsibility carried in full. When he realized something else that surprised him. The cross is not a symbol of conquest. It is a symbol of limitation, of sacrifice, of bearing weight instead of escaping it. In a world obsessed with expansion, speed, and influence, limitation feels uncomfortable, but without limits, nothing holds its shape. Every civilization that endured understood this truth. They restrained power not because leaders were weak, but because leaders were human. The gesture did not solve problems. It aligned the one who had to face them. And alignment always comes before effectiveness. It changed how he understood faith itself. Not as an escape from reality, but as a discipline that anchors reality. Not as an identity badge, but as a compass for action. Symbols only matter when they are lived. When they are empty, they become decoration. But when they are inhabited, they become force. In those few silent seconds before every decision, the gesture became a reminder not of belief alone, but of responsibility carried to its deepest level. It is natural to ask how something so small could ever influence outcomes so large. We live in an age that trusts scale, speed, force, visibility. We believe change must announce itself loudly to be real. But the most durable transformations rarely begin that way. They begin with rhythm. A simple action, repeated consistently, reshapes behavior over time, not through fear, through expectation. When a meeting always begins the same way, the mind enters the room differently. People arrive already slowed, already aware that this space is not casual, already prepared to carry weight. That small gesture creates a pause. Now, when the pause interrupts impulse, it breaks the automatic reactions that dominate modern decision-making. Without pause, meetings become competitions. With pause, they become deliberations. Culture is not created by speeches. It is created by what is done repeatedly without explanation. By beginning every meeting with the same act, a silent message was sent. This space is not about winning. This space is about choosing correctly. This space is not owned by ego. It is governed by responsibility. Over time, people adjust themselves to that message. Tone follows posture. Language follows tone. Decisions follow language. The pause also changed something deeper. It quietly equalized the room. Hierarchy still existed. Titles still mattered. Authority still functioned. But worth was no longer confused with rank. Yet in those few seconds, everyone present was reminded of the same truth. No one stands above accountability. Not the loudest voice. Not the most decorated uniform. not the person closest to power. That realization produces a kind of honesty no policy can enforce. Trust grows, not because people suddenly agree, but because they begin to believe the process itself is anchored. This is why small gestures matter more than grand declarations. Declarations excite. Gestures shape. When repeated daily, a gesture becomes a boundary. Inside that boundary, different behavior is expected. The world underestimates this kind of power because it cannot be easily measured. There is no chart for humility, no metric for conscience, no dashboard for integrity. Yet these invisible forces decide whether systems function or fracture. Real change does not require constant pressure. It requires consistent alignment. And alignment begins with the smallest movements, performed faithfully, especially when no one is watching. As time passed, he realized something quietly unsettling. This story was never really about him. It was about a question that follows every person who holds influence. Not only presidents, not only generals, not only politicians, CEOs, pastors, judges, teachers, parents, managers, creators, anyone whose choices shape the life of another human being. Before you decide for others, what do you bow to? Not what do you say you respect, not what your speeches celebrate, not what your social media claims. What do you actually submit to when no one is watching? Every leader answers this question. Some bow to public opinion, and some bow to money, some bow to fear, some bow to survival at any cost, some bow to their own image. The danger is not choosing the wrong answer once. The danger is never asking the question at all. When that question disappears, power begins to drift. Decisions detach from meaning. Authority becomes self-referential. Justifying harm becomes easier. Calling it necessary becomes convenient. Calling it business becomes normal. He was not shown the sign of the cross as a demand for religious conformity. He was shown a mirror that forces a leader to see himself in relationship to something greater than his own will. For Muslims, that boundary already exists in prayer. For Christians, it exists in conscience. For those who claim no faith, it exists in moral responsibility. The form is different, yet the essence is the same. What matters is not the symbol. What matters is whether a leader accepts a boundary he did not create. A leader who bows before truth will not be perfect, but he will be restrained. He will hesitate before harming. He will feel weight where others feel freedom. And that weight protects people. The world has seen enough leaders who bow only to themselves. Their nations pay the price long after their names disappear. He speaks now not as a symbol, but as a man who carries doubt, fatigue, and responsibility. He did not choose the hour he was born into. He did not choose the crises placed on his shoulders. He only chose how to stand beneath them. The world is tired. Nations are tired. Communities are tired. Families are tired. People are tired of noise, tired of outrage, tired of leaders who speak loudly and listen very little. We live in a culture that celebrates certainty and punishes reflection, but reflection is where wisdom begins. He does not ask the world to adopt his experience as doctrine. He does not ask Muslims to become Christians. He does not ask Christians to become something else. He does not ask anyone to imitate a gesture without understanding its meaning. He asks something simpler and far more difficult. Pause. Pause before the meeting. Pause before the order. Pause before the signature. Pause before the post. Pause before the sentence that cannot be taken back. In that pause, remember this. Power is not proof of correctness. Influence is not evidence of truth. Authority is not permission to forget conscience. Now, Africa has suffered not because it lacks intelligence, but because power has too often been exercised without moral grounding. And that pattern is not unique to any continent. The soil changes. The lesson does not. Faith, when genuine, does not pull us away from responsibility. It pushes us deeper into it. It does not simplify the world. It strengthens us to carry its complexity without becoming cruel. He does not wish a quiet peace. He wishes a just peace, not the peace of silence, but the peace of dignity. Not the strength of domination, but the strength of restraint. Not the clarity of easy answers, but the clarity of honest questions. To those who feel lost, remember this. Exhaustion is not failure. Sometimes it is the doorway through which truth finally enters. To those who feel angry, but remember that anger is often pain asking to be heard. To those who feel powerful, remember this. Power fades faster than consequences. Titles disappear. Positions change. But the impact of your decisions outlives your name. If this story stirred something inside you, do not rush past it. Sit with it. You do not need to agree with it. You only need to be honest with yourself. Because one question waits beneath every meeting, every vote, every contract, every command, every post, every private decision made behind closed doors. Before you decide for others, what do you bow to? Not what do you claim to respect, not what your brand celebrates, not what your audience expects. What do you truly submit to when no one is watching? Power will never stop testing you, but conscience will always try to protect others from you. The world does not need louder leaders. It needs more grounded ones, more restrained ones, more honest ones. People who understand that authority is not something you own. It is something you carry. And one day, you will put it down. Power fades. Consequences remain. Before you decide for others, what do you bow to? This story is inspired by real struggles of leadership, but it is a fictional narrative created for reflection. It is not an official speech. It is a question. A final line fades in slowly. Before you lead others, learn what leads you. Maybe leadership is not about standing above others. Maybe it is about choosing, every single day, to stand beneath truth, so others do not have to stand beneath you.